to the cloud.
All right, welcome everybody to the first SLA CIC webinar of 2022. Thank you so much for taking the time out on your day to join us in this fabulous community and to prioritize learning something new alongside these awesome intelligence veterans that we have with us. My name is Liz Frickleton with Aurora WDC, and we've been a longtime sponsor and supporter of the SLA and the CI community specifically. So we are just excited for this lively discussion today with Terry and Nat. So thank you both for being here. And we're talking about how to prepare for what's ahead in 2022 and beyond. But before we do, just want to cover a couple housekeeping items for us. So as you might have seen, this webinar will be recorded. You'll receive the webinar recording via email after this session. And we really, really want that that interactive experience. So please use the chat function available to you all at the lower portion of the Zoom pane, and you'll be able to submit your questions and comments there. Let's get to what we have coming up. And next, we're going to be looking at the conference that's coming up in July. But ahead of that, we need proposals. So the organization is looking for really compelling education session proposals. So now is the time to get those ideas out. And please submit those by February 22nd. It's just another way that we provide fantastic content, especially as a CI community. Let's get some of our ideas and thought leadership out there. So encourage you to think about how you could submit a session proposal. We'll put that link in the chat as well. So you have that for next steps of how that works and where you can go to do that. Also, if you are looking to upskill, this is an awesome opportunity with Cynthia Chen Correa. She might even be in the audience. I know she was on our registration. So hi, Cynthia, if you're out there. Her program that she runs through the SLA is fabulous. And she's running her Intel 2 course called Project Management, talking about the secret sauce of project management as it relates to successful CI programs or projects itself. So really that tactical advice that you can get from her. And then save the date for February 24th. We get to welcome two Canadians back to the platform. Jonathan Dennett and Jim Miller are teaming up to make the case for why intelligence can help us empower stakeholder capitalism and how we're moving away from just shareholder and how we need to be looking at this broader picture, right? And how Intel is positioned to do that. So we will also share the link to that. The one difference is going to be that when you register for our February show, you'll be registered for the rest of 2022. So that saves you from having to keep registering. So you'll be able to do that once and you'll be automatically added. And don't worry, you can cancel at any time. What are attendees saying? So we love this community. Terry, I had to pull this one out of the archives. This was actually, so Terry joined us in April 2020 to talk about the Innovators Dilemma. And it was said that your webinar was worth the price of membership to SLA. So you've got that going. So we are so thankful to have you back. Nat as well has been on the program too. So just know that your name will be thrown into the hat for $25. So hey, who doesn't want a little extra cash? So thank you again for being here and for sharing this with your networks as well. As we're continuing this discussion, please, if you're a Twitter user and you're into this, use the hashtag CIC webinar and let's get that discussion going there as well. That's one way that we've been trying to keep it a little bit more interactive as well. With that, I am going to pass the mic. Nat, I would love to have you introduce yourself first. Don't forget that. And then Terry, our esteemed speaker for today. So over to you.
Well, thank you, Liz. This is so it's good to be back with everybody. This is Nat Brooks. I've presented to you guys before and been in this racket for quite a while. And but the man who needs no introduction is the guy we're going to listen to today, which is Terry. I've known Terry since the early 2000s. We worked together on the Conference Board's Competitive Intelligence Council. And when he set out for the greener pastures of North Carolina in 2018. We've done a few projects together since then. So I've been a fan of Terry's work, and we've had a good time together on more than a few occasions. But we're here to talk about this remarkable
with the Brothers Johnson.
With the Brothers Johnson as well.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about this remarkable book that that Terry has written. Book came out at the end of September, I believe,
Thereabouts.
and it is an incredible piece of material. It is, as it says on its front cover, the elder story for young Homo sapiens about surviving their future history. And it is about the future. It's about trends. It's about thinking strategically about the future, but it's also quite an anthropological and historical work. And you know, if you've got, as somebody wrote in the foreword, if you've got some younger members of your tribe that have some idea that they're the first people to see reality, and that much of what they're seeing today has never happened before, you need to perhaps get them a copy of this book. It will help orient them in where the world has come from and where it's going. And so I thought the way we'd start this off, Terry, obviously you've been out with it now for 6 months or so, not quite. What's different? What's changed? Where's it going? How's it going? I guess is maybe the right way to start.
Well, I guess I hope you can hear me okay. I guess the most frustrating element, and I forecast this, is that in many respects it's already becoming obsolete. The number of technological changes that are coming online that are disruptive is increasing. For example, I never got around in the book to talk about the metaverse. Missed that one. And of course, NFTs is another topic, along with I guess Dutch tulips in terms of crowd mania. But it has reinforced the fact that change is accelerating. And I'm going to take this moment, if I can, and I'm going to share my screen for just a second as a bit of context, and hopefully everyone can see that. And this is what the book is about. I would argue that as a species, we are embarking on our fourth age. The first age was from when we became anatomically modern humans, whatever that means, about 200,000 BC, up until I'd say about 10,000 BC. And during that period, we were hunter-gatherers. From 10,000 BC to, pick a date, 1785, we were farmer-herders. Why 1785? Well, that's just about the date where steam engines became commercially available that were reliable. From 1785 on to, pick a date, I picked 2020, the start of the COVID pandemic, for our third age, when we manufactured things. And we are now on the brink of what I'm calling the fourth age, that is demonstrated most, I think, graphically in the rate and degree of change, both of which are accelerating exponentially over time. And the challenge for us is whether anything in our cultural or societal baggage that we developed over these preceding three ages have any value to the coming generation in terms of coping with that fourth age. Let me get that back to where we can look at each other. So that's the gist of it. I think for the purposes of today, everybody's probably asking, okay, well, what does that mean for me in 2022? And obviously, longer term strategic trends that take decades to emerge, you're hard pressed to look at that stuff in the short term and say, why does that apply?
Mhm.
But I would argue that when you see where those trends are going, they raise questions about how you're going to invest funds, how you're going to allocate resources, how you're going to prioritize your strategic initiatives going forward. And for business, I think the implications of the technological changes that are all coming together that I go into gory detail in the book, the bottom line is we are going from a world of a few making thousands to a world of thousands making a few. This is being enabled by 3D printing, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, new materials, synthetic biology, cheap, ubiquitous off-grid energy, just to name a few. And it begs the question for business, if I have been competing against a few who make thousands, and my new competitors are thousands making a few, how do I profile them? How do I do my sort of SWOT? I'll say SWOT, but I use OTS SWOT analysis of what the competition, what the implications of the competition are when you're basically being eaten by duck. You know, you're pecked to death by ducks. There's a good example is shampoo.
Mhm.
You can go online and find custom shampoo producers who will do a profile of your hair and your particular preferences and customize and send you your very own personal shampoo, thanks to
Mhm.
Amazon. How does Procter and Gamble attempt to compete with that? Now, obviously, it's not a big deal today, but it may be a bigger deal tomorrow.
Mhm.
And if you are making investments in the future, and that starts costing money, the question becomes, at what point do you have to factor these dramatic changes in to your future strategy profile? And candidly, I've never met a company that thinks past the next quarter. And that includes AB Electrolux and General Electric and Lubrizol and everybody else in between.
Mhm. Well, let's play with a couple of those things. One, because I think that's a great juxtaposition, the few making thousands and the thousands making few. But some folks might go down the hole of saying, well, that's the way it used to be, that in an environment where there was, and I'm setting this up so you can declare how it's very different, is in an environment where transportation and communication was not that great, every village had a cobbler, so and a candle maker. Now this is different in some important ways. Talk about that for a second.
Well, in some respects, it's going back to, I wouldn't call it a medieval model, but we, I think, are on the road back to every village having a cobbler in some respect. The capacity for individuals, Maker Faire, the whole maker movement
Mhm.
is sort of the front edge of that, where people are, because the technology is at their fingertips and they can buy a 3D printer and have it on their kitchen table. The capacity to compete where heretofore you couldn't touch competition against mass production. The Henry Ford million Model Ts, or any color you want as long as it's black. The cost effectiveness of that curve was insurmountable, and you would make 80% of your profits off of 20% of your SKUs, because those were the mass produced ones, and you made it up in volume. And I would argue that technology is enabling a future where inventory and economies of scale are obsolete. And I can make onesies and twosies, and I can customize them. So my onesies and twosies are of greater value to the customer and are at the same or lower price because I'm making it locally, and I have the customer's input as to what they want, and I'm almost literally handing it to them over the counter. It's a dramatic change, and obviously it's not here today. But if you look at all the trend lines, that's the future.
Right.
And if you are thinking strategically about the future of your company, the example in the book is, and it's an old one, it's the advent of automobiles. And I refer back to the great manure crisis of the late 1800s, where all of our major cities, the city planners came together, New York, London, Paris, came together for a conference because they were drowning, literally drowning in manure, and had no solution. They couldn't figure out what to do. Well, there's two pictures in the book of one of the main thoroughfares in New York City in 1904 and 1913. And in the first, it's all horse-drawn,
right.
one or two cars. And in the last picture, it's all cars and one or two horse-drawn.
In the space of 10 years.
In the space of 10 years. And if you just think back over your own lives, one of the points I make in the book is that the societal and technological changes are so dramatic, we don't necessarily see them happening, but think about this. Any child for the preceding 200,000 years, 7,000 generations, whatever it is, any child could look at their parents and their grandparents and say, my life, I can pattern on how they lived, because my future is going to look pretty much
similar,
like theirs.
Slightly different, but yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe different styles in clothing, but that rate and degree of change was slow and incremental. These started picking up in the third age, and now it has taken off. And there isn't anything about my childhood in the 50s and the 60s that I can impart to my grandchildren that has any bearing on how they're going to have to cope with the world they envision, because it doesn't look the same. And that happened within our lifetime.
Right.
We just don't recognize the rate of change.
No, I'm a poster child with young children, and
well,
the 1970s to the 2000s, I mean, or 2020s is completely different.
Well,
so
I'm sitting in my son's house here, and I mentioned in the book, I quoted my daughter-in-law this past summer in July. They were watching Christmas movies in July, and they were watching Home Alone. And Macaulay Culkin watches a gangster movie on a VHS player. And the four kids look at my daughter-in-law and say, well, what is that machine?
What is that machine? Right.
That's a VHS player. Well, how does it work? Well, you would go to the store, and the store would have rows and rows and rows of these little boxes, and in each box they had a tape of the movie. And depending upon when you got to the store, if it was a popular movie, to see if there were any tapes left, but you could quick grab one and you'd rent it, you take it home and you put it in that machine.
Right.
And then you could watch the movie. And then we had a second machine. When you got done, you take that out to the second machine to rewind it before you. And the eldest of her grandchildren looked at her and said, how did you live like that? I
Yes, well, how do we live like a lot of things? Anyways, well, let's talk about some of these trends. And let me toss up this question. I've got a couple I'll come back to because I think somebody asked a question in the comments, and I think it plays back to this issue of how it's different and how it comes to part, or how some of these trends come together. Somebody asked, well, what is the lack of trust or problems with social trust? How does that impact? And it's like, well, okay, now that we have this, I'll throw this up to you, and then you can riff on it. I think this is an interesting issue because and maybe you had shared this with me, I don't remember, but I recently saw a thing where the Davos set, one of the people in the Davos set was sitting around talking about trust and talking about amongst ourselves, we all trust each other to know what the heck we're doing and how we're going to change the world. But we have a problem. We've polled the rest of the humanity and they don't trust us. And so in some respects, the people that are the trendsetters and the inventors and the people that are sort of making the world, they're also making the very elements that will devolve, if you will. And in this case of things like, all right, well, what about the many thousands making fuse? Well, this actually plays to that to some extent, doesn't it? I mean, when we start to distrust the systems and realize that in a lot of cases they're empty suits, then I'm more willing to go to my neighbor for that pair of shoes than I am to go to Amazon.
Well, I'm going to give you a long answer to the question, and I'm going to start with the premise that I make in the book, which is I would argue that human beings are driven by instincts that were fashioned 200,000 years ago on the savannah. And I'll distill them down into 4 basic instincts. First of which is we are fearful of everything.
Right.
And when we are afraid, we tend to overreact violently. And that is just instinctive. Secondly, we discovered that living in groups improved our chances of finding a mate, to pass on our genes, and to survive. So we are incredibly social animals. We spend about 20% of every day in one form or another socializing. Now, 200,000 years ago, that involved picking fleas out of your neighbor's fur, but we still do that 20% every day. Thirdly, within a social group, which is hierarchical, we work very, very hard to increase our status, our prestige within the group, because that improves our chances of surviving and getting a better mate. And then fourth and finally, we're curious, not for any philanthropic, wonderful Neil deGrasse type, we're searching the heavens for wonder, but rather we're concerned about what's over the next hill because we're afraid it may eat us. Okay, so we're driven by those 4 instincts. They drive us into groups. And when you're in a group and you're trying to increase your status within the group, you became a victim of groupthink. So whoever at the top are thinking, whatever they're thinking, you adhere to it. Now, people have always argued, I should say, psychologists have historically argued that there is, without getting into the science, there's a modern rational brain and there is a primitive instinctual brain. And heretofore, the thinking had been that the modern rational brain is there to control that instinctive brain and keep it, from doing silly things. Well, the most recent research on it suggests that's not the case. The purpose of the rational brain is not to control the instinctive brain, it's to come up with a good story to tell your group as to why it is you're going to do what your instinctive brain wants you to do. Okay, So now let's take that groupthink thing, and we'll now
The
go
invention
to
of marketing.
we'll now go to Davos. And I'm going to quote Hans Rosling, who passed away several years ago, but wrote a book on his experiences and his discovery and subsequent experiences with the fact that most people in the world don't know the facts of the condition of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the course of several years, he went to 17 countries and 12,000 people, I think, and he ran a 13-question survey where it had 3 answers for each, A, B, C.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, the people at Davos who he tested fared no better, and in fact, in some cases, worse than the average population. Now, the average population fared worse than a troop of monkeys, because monkeys would have evenly picked randomly among the 3 choices. But the discovery was the simple facts of the world. What's the rate of childhood education?
Mm-hmm.
What's the condition of poverty? Has it gotten better or worse? Those sorts of very strategic, broad questions. The people you mentioned at the top of the
Mm-hmm.
of our groupthink hierarchies, who
Mm-hmm.
are concerned about trust.
Right.
Well, there's good reason that people don't trust them, because they got the facts wrong.
Right.
Now take in charge the my phone's going out. Take in charge the model for decision making that humans use, the DIKW model: data, information, knowledge, wisdom. You take data, which is the raw stream of everything that's flowing by, and you identify those bits of it that are useful to the question you're trying to answer, and you pull
Mm-hmm.
that out. Now you've got a body of information. And then you analyze that information and you arrive at knowledge, which is how to do something. And virtually all managers in business possess knowledge. They know how to do things.
Mm-hmm.
But the critical step between knowledge and wisdom is looking at alternative paths of what to do, distinguishing among them and deciding what not to do and what to do. So, the famous Drucker quote, managers do things right, but leaders do the right things.
Right.
Now, think back to your Davos group where they're concerned about trust. Well, hell, if they don't have the facts right, they haven't pulled the right information out of the data, they can't possibly have generated knowledge that's the correct what to do.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord knows how they get to the whether to do it.
Right.
And I guess what really kills me about this is when you sort of look at that pattern, and we talk about wise people as being elderly. Why are old people wise and young people are not wise? Well, I would argue older people tend to be wiser because they have survived doing the wrong thing
Right.
long enough that they have figured out not how to do something, but whether and what to do.
Right.
That's the determinant. And I'm not surprised about the Davos people.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's just the throw on that. Here's another little book push here, which is, well, it looks backwards to me.
Yeah, I got to get that one.
You need to get
that.
this one right here.
Yeah.
So this is from Ronald Bailey at Cato. But yeah, I mean, it's that issue with people. But let me come back. Let me hit one thought or question to sort of let you go on a little bit, and then I've got one that I want to pull out from the chat here that just came in that I thought was another way to fit into this, because I think it's the information issue here, and you probably will set this up for us. But if you look at some of the trends and some of the things that you obviously spent a lot of time setting yourself up or getting yourself in a frame of understanding where those trends are going, and now that you're seeing some of this stuff post publication, what are some of the scariest or most, use the word sinister, trends that
Well,
things that scare you?
here's the one that the one that angers me the most. Okay, and it has to do with sustainability
Mhm.
and climate change, which is, of course, on every headline at the moment. And of course, the climate has always been changing. The question is, to what degree does human activity alter it? Now, there's a societal and there's a technological driver for climate change.
Mhm.
On the societal side, I'd argue it's population.
Mhm.
And on the technological side, I'd argue it's the third age 20th century Henry Ford mass production model of the global economy. Now let's pause and talk about the societal side. The conventional wisdom, and again, this goes back to our Davos perfume delete, is that our population is going to continue to grow forever and we're all going to die because there's too many people.
Mhm.
Look at the UN data, and that's not indeed the case. Even the UN data suggests that by the end of the century, we will have reached peak population of between 11 and 13 billion, depending upon at what point you talk to the UN. But there are a whole range of demographic experts who are saying that, in fact, peak population is going to come sooner and at a lower rate. Why?
Mhm.
Well, because we are moving into the cities. For the first time, more people live in cities than in the country, for the first
Mhm.
time ever. And when women get to cities, they stop having
Having
babies.
babies, yeah.
They get better education, better medical care, and you don't need the kids to work the fields. Okay, now you're looking at peak population passing. Well, in point of fact, half of the countries of the world are already below reproduction rates. 95% of the UN's forecast growth between now and the end of the century is Africa. If you look at Eastern Europe, Japan, and South Korea, they are set to lose 40% of their population. Russia's going to look 17%, I think they're losing. The only countries that are close to maintaining their population going forward will be the Anglo-Saxon countries: United
Mhm.
States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Everybody's concerned about growing population when most of the data suggests that within our lifetime, we will be confronting a world of shrinking population.
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, once it starts to shrink, it won't stop.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Is anybody factoring those implications in? And oh, by the way, in those profiles, those demographic pyramids that are
Mhm.
all inverted, it's more elderly people and fewer younger people going forward.
Right.
Is anybody factoring in those implications for sustainability issues? I don't think so.
Right. Right.
Now, flip to the technological side. If we're going from a Henry Ford mass production model of a few making thousands to thousands making a few, I have no idea what the environmental profile is from a climate change standpoint, let alone toxicity or anything else, of an individual making a few items custom in a local town for local consumers.
Right.
What are the environmental implications of that versus Henry Ford manufacturing?
Mhm.
I don't know the answer, but nobody is talking about it.
Right. Right.
And so just take those two trends right there,
Yeah.
and the future of sustainability is going to be very different than what everybody's planning for now, because they're planning
Right.
on a model that's obsolete.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about a lot of the things which I would say it's almost been amplified during the pandemic is that uh, we can't even have a decent conversation about fundamental elements of these things. Like, well, it's like, all right, so we're worried about climate change. Well, we pick kind of a weird bogeyman that doesn't work very well. Carbon dioxide is not a very good bogeyman. It's not that effective. It's a lagging indicator when you look at the geological history. Uh, it's kind of strange, but we can't have that conversation, let alone this sort of deflationary element of population shrinkage. in what that means. I mean, that's a interesting one. But on the flip, it's interesting too. I think I just sent you the other day. Your trend is all on about Africa. I mean, Africa is the growing continent now. And that's another thing that, and interesting, I think I sent you a link to an interview.
Yeah.
English author. Again, nobody's talking about the fact that the future growth in population is coming from Africa, and every place else is going to shrink.
Well, and when you talk about societal change, and of course we have lived for our past generation in a global economy post World War II, thanks to the United States Navy making the world safe for global activity. But think about a future world where Nigeria, some of the countries, I don't remember off the top of my head, but some of the African countries are going to increase their population by 500%.
Right, yeah. And Nigeria, one of them being the most populous.
Yeah, and
right.
Now, you talk about political stability. Well, they're not particularly stable at the moment. Burkina Faso just had a coup. So their infrastructure isn't particularly good to start with. Their political systems, their societal hierarchies aren't strong, and they're going to be absolutely overwhelmed with population growth. Now, that's pretty politically destabilizing. At the same time, losing 40% of your population in an Eastern European country, that's also going to be politically destabilizing. Now, layer on top of that, China's population has already peaked, and they're beginning to age, so they don't have enough youthful workers. In addition, thanks to communist central planning, they lived for at least a generation with a one-child policy because they were scared to death of population growth. Well, in that one-child world, people tended to favor male babies over female babies. So there are now 25 million Chinese young men for which there are no young Chinese women.
Right.
Now look at India. India is continuing to grow, but they've had, for different cultural reasons, the same predilection for male babies. And as a result, in India, there are 80 million Indian men for which there are no Indian women. Now, you want to talk about political destabilization. There's an awful lot of unrequited testosterone floating around there. So these trends, again, come back to your business model. Do you truly want to be a global economy for the next generation, or a global economic player for the next generation, given what's likely to be a retreat from global economic activity and the balkanization, very likely balkanization of markets? And we're seeing companies pulling out of China left, right, and center at the moment. So these trends we're beginning to see them. So does it make more sense for you to be a strong local player rather than to have the cachet of being a global player, given the risks associated there?
Yeah.
And again, I don't have the answers, but you look at these trends and you apply them to your business, and I don't think people are talking about this.
Right. So let's turn to another sort of a trend issue, and I think I don't know how to think about it between the difference between sort of garbage piling in the streets and information or knowledge. It seems to me that maybe there's potentially some more knowledge, but there's a lot more garbage than knowledge. Because Craig actually threw this question up there. What got him was the manure crisis, but then he turned it to sort of the information crisis. We now have so much information, and as I said, my sense is a lot of that information is nothing more than just vastly larger piles of garbage. But where is that going, or how do you see that in terms of a of a trend? Is it what's good, what's bad, what's the take
Well,
on
I mean,
where that's going to go?
you're absolutely right. Craig hit it. There's a I can't remember the name. I'm a boomer. I've gotten to the age I can't remember names. But there's a story I quote in the book of an advisor to an ancient Muslim ruler. And he was the person who apparently invented the game of chess. And the ruler was so impressed that he said, I will reward you with whatever you want. Tell me what you want. And the advisor said, all I want is for you to put 1 grain of wheat on the first block in the chessboard, and 2 in the second, and 4 in the third, and 8 in the fourth, and just finish doing that throughout all the blocks on a chessboard, and I'll be happy. And the vizier said, well, that can't be very, you asked for something else. He said, no, that's all I want. And as soon as he gave that command to his underlings, they said, well, there's not enough grain in the country, in the world, to fill that chessboard. And we are undergoing exponential growth in information. And so when you look at that DIKW model, the data now, it's a fire hose. I go back to my national security days and open source intel. You went to the library, you read the papers, magazines. OSINT, open source intel, today is a fire hose.
Right.
And to your point, most of it is not, I wouldn't say it's garbage, but it's not material to what you're looking at. It's not material to your question. And so trying to parse through that fire hose to get the teacup of information that you need to analyze is becoming incredibly difficult. And this is, everybody says AI will save us because it'll be able to do that for us. Well, yes, maybe, I'm not so sure. The point with AI is it's not what it does, it's who tasks it to
or
do
what it's doing to you.
But it raises this fundamental critical uncertainty, which is, how do we get through that tsunami of data that is now available to us to make any kind of intelligent information parsing, to even begin to get to knowledge.
Right.
And again, we tend to revert to what we know, which is why Davos attendees think they know it, but it's it's the old Rumsfeld quote,
Right.
You don't
Well,
know.
also the belief that because you occupy a position higher up on the perch, that somehow you must know more than other people. That's the only way you could have gotten to that point on the perch. And so,
well, and getting back to our
arrogance in there that's very interesting. I mean, I don't.
Well, and it's
obviously
also
people
fear.
can argue about that, but
it's
and
also
fear, right? Fear, right? You have something
knowing.
to protect, right? Yeah.
And so you bluster your way along, because if you show that you don't know what you're talking about, if you ever stood up and said, I don't know the answer to that question, they'll eat you from below.
Right. Right.
There's hierarchies that, in business, everybody talks about matrix organizations. I've never seen a matrix organization that really wasn't a series of hierarchies,
right,
by another name.
Right. Well, and my challenge in the organization thing was always to suss out in which of those hierarchies really made the decisions, because you'd have those matrices, and that one element of that matrix, I don't know which one of them was the controlling one, and that's actually from a business standpoint, and I think from an intelligence analyst standpoint, it becomes really important to be, you have to figure that out. Otherwise, you're just parroting the talking points. You're not really understanding who's making the decisions
And the
what's
matrix
motivations are.
organizations cloud it or just
Right.
mask it completely. But there's still hierarchies. It's how we behave. It's instinctive.
Mhm.
And then of course you've got the battles among the vice presidents,
Right.
you know, who succeeds and who fails. And they'll, it's all groupthink.
Right.
Groupthink.
So that brings another question. I'll come back to another question. I think Jim Miller popped up here, which I think is a good one, which is to talk a little bit about how do we think about education in this environment and what needs to change there. But just before that, just an aside, I think for those of us who are in the analyst side and the information researching side, really interesting book just hit the radar not too long ago in the last couple of months from Matt Ridley, about the origins of COVID, and that open source research by some very tenacious individuals have probably got the answer. They know, again, and what they did, again, obviously we lived in an sort of an information op, telling us what to say and what not to say, and that's been obviously spit around in the news media, but that, some very tenacious researchers through open source and never letting go have probably got the answers as good as anybody has as to where it came from, how it developed, and et cetera. And I found that fascinating. I also found that a little bit sort of encouraging, that the process that we try to follow in this game, it still is meaningful, although it's still important, and the process is important. But of course, you have to jump, as we were saying before, you have to walk over a whole lot more garbage to get there than you probably have in the past.
Yeah, and part of there's a good news, bad news for me, which is and I'll get to the edge. I'll fold in sort of the education question.
Yeah.
The amount of OSINT is just absolutely overwhelming. And the number of OSINT generators is exponentially increasing. And the means whereby data and information is being shared is well and beyond the printed word. What I found interesting in the research is when we look at a number of what are perceived to be human problems, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, these never were an issue before we started printing books. They were all survival attributes for a group on the savannah. Having somebody who was fidgety and always wanted to know what was over the hill was a valuable addition to the tribe.
Right.
Somebody who was sort of anal retentive was a valuable addition to the tribe. And so reading in some respects has propelled us but held us back.
Right. Say more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. When you now look at, and I'll go to YouTube, if there is anything on a how to do, not whether to do it, but how to do something, there's a YouTube video for it.
Right.
My daughter-in-law's car, they got a Toyota Sienna. And of course, we're stuck here at the moment watching their kids. My granddaughter is in the hospital fighting cancer, and so I have to drive this Toyota Sienna, and there's a little compartment between the seats with a lid, and the catch has been broken, and it drives me friggin' crazy. So I'm taking it apart to figure out how to fix it, and Carol pulls up YouTube and comes out with her phone and says, well, here's a video on how to fix that door on a 2007 Toyota Sienna. So if there's any any question you've got, there's a YouTube video about it.
Yep.
That's the good news. The bad news is, to your point, not all of them are really well. Some of them are pretty lame. And it begs the question whether future education, which is now becoming immersive, there are sites where you can go into the site, through YouTube, and eventually in 3 dimensions with a headset. And you can be walking through a reconstruction of ancient Athens or ancient Rome.
Right.
So you're no longer reading history, you are in the midst of and living it. Those are wonderful, wonderful tools, assuming that whoever programmed it didn't have an agenda.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the downside. And so who's telling you what, and how they've chosen to couch it.
Right.
And don't you think that walking in a 3-dimensional environment through ancient Rome and having a guide next to you who is explaining to you how the Republic fell, that person's interpretation of it is going to be a hell of a lot more persuasive because you're physically there than if you read it in a book.
Right.
So the educational opportunities are huge, and for dystopian education, it's scary.
So yeah, let's talk about education then. So if you looked at, I mean, and obviously you do have been doing teaching for a while. You've done roles at various universities. What do we need to do to make the generation that you wrote the book for? What do we need to do to make education, or maybe we don't even call it education, maybe just call it knowledge downloading. What do we do to index up their ability to face this very complex and rapidly changing future?
I'll go back to the fundamental flaw that Hans Rosling evidenced with our perfumed elites. Republican, Democrat, liberal, Tory, doesn't matter. They're all in the same boat, which is they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And so for me, if there's any hope for the future, it's leveraging the technology tools that are coming online to truly get a grip on the information that you need to develop knowledge about how to deal with problems. At the moment, our model isn't working because the knowledge that's being generated is on information that came from bad data.
Sure.
So the biggest challenge, I think, for the future is how do we sort through this fire hose to get the teacup of information that will enable us to generate the knowledge as to how to do what needs to be done. Because that's the piece that's not working. We're using bad data to arrive at faulty information, and we think we know what we're doing, and we don't. Now, how do you get there? Boy, that's the challenge. I'm no prophet. The purpose of the book was to get people to recognize that we need to think about these things. And I come back to the whole sustainability thing. I think the whole sustainability debate is premised upon the wrong assumption as to the future global economic model. And then the demographics. People aren't talking about the real problems. What happens in your country, in Eastern Europe, when the population starts to drop? And it doesn't stop, because you've never had enough women of childbearing age to produce enough children to compensate. These are profound issues.
Well, if so, to look for maybe a note of optimism with about 5 minutes left. What things have surprised you or are surprising to you that you think, well, this is actually pretty cool. This is going to be good for us.
Well, and it's all anecdotal, and it's my grandchildren. I wrote the book for my nieces and nephews and grandchildren, grandnieces, grandnephews, and grandchildren. But in observing my grandchildren, the one heartening factor is their adaptability to technology, and they're not afraid of technology. And so while I was previously saying that for the first time ever, these kids can't look to their parents or grandparents for a pattern as to what their world is going to look like, it's going to be entirely different. And as a boomer, I'm, good luck, I can't help you. It may be okay because these kids, something new comes along and they pick it right up. They're not afraid of change because change has been so much a part of their lives already.
Right.
And their adaptability to it may hopefully keep them from becoming too afraid, because in the chaos that's kind of once we get afraid, we overreact violently. And when that's what we do. We're Homo sapiens. We're homines sapientes. That's a great story. Why do I use homines sapientes? I sent the book out in manuscript form, and one of the professors I asked to read it was a classics professor, and he immediately said, "Well,
you don't know your damn Latin."
Homo sapiens is singular. Now, of course, in popular use, everybody says Homo sapiens. Nobody says homines sapientes. But I stuck it in the title, and it's in a footnote, as a classic example of we think we know something when we don't.
Right.
And that's the challenge. And so I guess my happy thought for the future is that our kids are probably better than we are at coping with this stuff, because I sure can't.
Well, the future is where we're going to spend the rest of our life, right?
Exactly so. Exactly
Super.
so. And if people don't start thinking about it, Katie, bar the door.
Well, it's going to happen. Well, it's going to happen to us whether we think about it or not.
That's right. Whether we think about it or not, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have some handle in making it better, and we'll figure it all out. So super. Well, hey, this has been fun. It is just about the top of the hour, so we'll give everybody back their afternoon. And
I see Liz.
a lot of nice thank yous are coming through, and obviously good stuff. So I will encourage everybody as we sign out. Hey, get a copy, and those younger members of your tribe, they really this is an education in this book. It's an enormous amount of resources are in here, and it's just fantastic. And I would say, I'll just say this. I mean, if I was 25 years old and starting off in the real world, and there was a book like that for this age, boy, that would be required reading, absolutely required reading. So anyway, thanks everybody. Liz, would give it back to you.
Sure. Well, thank you both. It's been a pleasure having you on. And if you all are wondering about that link to the book, I know I'm adding it to my Amazon cart. So in the follow-up email, we'll throw the link into that communication for you, as well as the link for next month's webinar and to get registered for the rest of the year. So we're just thankful to have you all as a part of this community. Terry, this has been wonderful. Nat, thank you so much for driving the conversation as well. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.